Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video, we're going to be doing a breakdown of Futures Rewritten Ultimate. I'm going to go phase by phase, talk about all the mechanics, the prog experience, if there were any surprises, both for things that were there and weren't there, as well as share my overall thoughts about the fight. I gotta say, this was the most fun that I've had. It helped that I had a group of people that I played with through tons of scenarios before, all in like different groups at different points in time. Some people I did Gordius with, some people I did UCOB with, some people I did Top with or DSR, then just all coalesced into one experience that was definitely my highlight ultimate experience across everything. While DSR definitely had the most emotional punch when it came to the clear itself, and Uwu definitely had my best battle cry. This for me was just the most level experience and probably one that it encourages me for the future of both their encounter design as well as their especially their showmanship, which we'll definitely be talking about in some of the later phases. But let's get into it because this is going to be a really long video and I don't want to strain my voice too much after the 16 hours a day of streaming that I've already been doing over the past week or over the time that it took to actually get through this fight. So let's start with phase 1 against Fatebreaker. I was kind of right in my prediction. I called that Fatebreaker would very much feel like a living liquid phase. It was going to be fast, it was going to be execution, and he was just going to disappear and not come back later in the fight, which definitely ended up happening. It was still a little surprising because it definitely felt more like a slightly tuned up version of the Savage encounter, which for a first phase isn't too bad, and it definitely made the repeatability of this during the 5-day stretch it took me to clear far more palatable. While it's not like generally exciting, I think all phase 1s kind of lose their excitedness and it becomes about how, I guess, tedious it is to do on repeat so you can get to the more important things. And this was one of the less tedious ones on top of being one of the less challenging ones. Honestly, after Top, I wasn't looking for another Looper. I wasn't looking for another Pantocrator. And quite frankly, with Thornton, I wasn't looking for another Meteor. I wanted something that was just, okay, here it is, just nothing fancy, no like randomness or like crazy prio systems that are hard to track or anything like that. Just do the mechanics, get through, and then you can go to the next part of the fight. And that's really what they delivered here. So this was already kind of like a good start to me, even if it is a little too much on the easy side. And there's definitely some stuff missing that I thought was going to be here. So let's get into it. These markers, kind of standard ultimate markers, you see something like that in almost all cases, unless there's a specific strategy that, moves the markers around in specific ways. But right from the get-go, they need to teach us a new mechanic with Fatebreaker called Cyclonic Break. Now, in the original Savage encounter, there was Elemental Break, which was basically Cyclonic Break, but without as many conal AoEs. It would fire a conal AoE at each player and then do a follow-up effect based on the element of the Elemental Break. Now, here in this fight, we have the Lightning Break and we have the Fire Break. The Lightning Break and Fire Break work similarly to the way they worked in Savage, where the Lightning Break is a spread AoE and the Fire Break is a pair AoE, meaning that 2 players need to stack up, a DPS and a support, a tank or a healer, if you will. Now, one thing that was surprising right from the get-go is that there are no light elemental mechanics, which was 1/3 of the elemental mechanics that were present in Savage. For Elemental Break, for example, it would target both the healers and a tank with a conal AoE and do split damage between each of those 3 conals that it fired out. So everyone would have to dodge the first conals that come out and then get into their, groups of 3 and the 2 tanks would stack up. And that was all there really was to it. There were other, obviously, light mechanics. We'll talk about the various other ones later. And you're going to hear the word various a lot in this video. I promise you it's going to get annoying at some point. At first I thought, man, it's really surprising they didn't use light. Then I thought about what all the light mechanics do. And I don't really think they would have added much other than kind of completing the image of Fatebreaker itself. One of the light mechanics gives a player a bomb that explodes 5 seconds later for a ton of damage. You could technically make the bomb longer, apply the bomb, and then have the bomb go off in the middle of another mechanic to surprise you. So that's something they definitely could have done that would have been, I think, fitting. But raid-wide damage isn't exactly an interesting thing, and there's plenty of ways to force raid damage onto the party that, quite frankly, doesn't involve a bomb that's just going to explode after 20 to 25 seconds or whatever they would have made it for an ultimate encounter. I already mentioned the Elemental Break, and then the last one was, I'm so bad at remembering the actual names. As we go through, I'll get to see all the names, but there's one where he basically puts an AoE under the player, and it goes off a few seconds later. So you bait the AoE and then you move out of the way. Again, they could have done that, but I'm not going to lie. There's been so much of that in Ultimates, twisters, as we tend to call those styles of mechanics based on Twintanya's version, that I didn't really miss having them. I've had enough twisters for one lifetime, so they just focus on the raw executional elements of fire and lightning instead of having those kind of more tricky ones. So the other thing is that Cyclonic Break is a different take on Elemental Break. Cyclonic Break is Elemental Break, but each of the follow-up AoEs after the second one rotates a certain number of degrees. I think it's like 30 degrees or something like that. But basically, these first AoEs drop. You get hit by all of those. You do the spread or stack up with your pair partner. And the second set of cleaves go off. And from this point, they actually rotate clockwise around the boss. So it means that if another player isn't like perfectly in line, like it kind of looks like we're all perfectly in our spread spots right here, it can get really scary knowing where the safe spot is, that if you're dodging into a safe spot somebody else is creating, instead of just following your own safe spot. There's definitely some times where other people made me get hit by a cleave, or I even made the tank right there get hit by a cleave just because I was off by a little bit and they hadn't calculated for me being even a little off. But this isn't really a fancy mechanic in any capacity. Then we get Powder Mark Trail. This is basically just a way of A, forcing a tank swap, and B, forcing a double tank buster to come out during the next mechanic. So in the original fight, Powder Mark hits very hard and then gives the main tank a debuff that if they die or if the debuff expires, they do a massive tank buster explosion. Now, you're supposed to, of course, just get away from the party and use cooldowns and do the explosion. But for this, it also causes the nearest player to explode. So the idea is both the tanks have to be the closest to each other and the furthest from everyone else. It's a nifty little idea that's fun and fine, but it's not used in any sort of special way. It's used in really predictable locations, so it can never really catch you off guard. And I say that because it's got about 10 seconds left, and it's going to go off here at the start of Utopian Sky. Now, Utopian Sky is a take on Shattered Sky and I think Scattered Sky, or I don't remember what both of them are from the normal and savage mode. But it's basically a big old downtime mechanic. Now, in this case, the boss uses Prismatic, which I just call it prismatic, but basically it obscures different clones around the arena, and you have to in some way communicate with your team to figure out which clones are there and which clones aren't. It's kind of just like a hidden version of in DSR Phase 1 when you have to find the two safe sides of the arena and then either stack or spread. Well, in that case, it's always spread, but in this case, it can be stack or spread, depending on the element of this attack. So this is a fire mechanic. I thought it was interesting that for fire during Utopian Sky, it's actually spread for lightning, which is normal, but instead of it being pairs, it's actually light parties for Utopian Sky. It's the only time in this fight where that happens. And it's just kind of surprising that it just has different stacking rules, but the general rule of thumb is if it's fire, it means that players are going to be grouping up as long as they are meant to be taking damage from the attack. So that's what they decided to do here, and it works just fine. So he obscures the arena, and just like in Savage, and even normal mode, you have to go and find the clones. If they raise their arm, they're going to do an AoE directly in front of them across the arena. And if they don't, they are going to disappear and do nothing. So you have to find a spot in the room that either, well, in this case, there's a clone in all 8 spots. But you have to find 2 spots in the room where the clone's arm isn't raised, and those are the 2 spots across from each other. So all we did is honestly not much different than we would have done in the Savage mode is we assign one half of the room to one light party, the other half to the other. So in this case, I'm on A1, D, and 4 side. So no matter where is safe, I will be in one of those 4 safe spots. And then the other light party has the other markers. And once we know where the safe spot is, which will always be opposite of each other, we just, group up and do the mechanic respectively there. The big thing is right here at the beginning, that powder mark trail is about to explode. You can actually already see the debuff has worn off and the damage is basically about to register. So I had to step off to the side a little bit to make sure that I was never too close. If I stood like right here to the left, I actually would be the closest person to the tank. And that's not good. They can also kind of shift over. It's not that strict of a mechanic, but I always just stepped a few crystals off to the side. See these little crystals on the arena right here? Yeah, we're going to use those for a lot of things. And then it's just a matter of watching the arm. So he doesn't raise his arm in this one, but you can see for everyone who does get a raised arm, or if the person across from them actually ran in, that's how we communicate what's safe and what isn't. Again, this was pretty much exactly the same in E11S, where if your area was not going to be safe, you ran into the middle of the room, and the two people who didn't move into the center of the room were the safe side. That's how they communicated, by doing nothing. I happen to be in said safe spot, and because we had the fire mechanic, that means we're in light parties, so we all group up. And as soon as that smack comes down, we see we're in the safe area. We also get this explosion on us, which is going to do the split damage between the four of us, and the same for the people on the other side. Right after that is another cyclonic break. Now, a big thing with downtime mechanics in Final Fantasy XIV is the aggro list. Normally, my aggro list isn't in this like really annoying central spot, even covering part of my party list. But it was so important to this fight, I decided to stuff it there so there was no chance that I was going to miss anything that was happening on it. In this case, you can see Fatebreaker himself is one of his images is casting Cyclonic Break. So in this case, it's just another fire break or a lightning break, pairs or spread. We happen to get a fire Cyclonic Break in this case, and so we just group up into the pairs and do the dodge. At the same time, another one comes down and does a fire AoE, and another one over here is doing a burnt strike. Burnt strike was the thing I was mentioning earlier where I said the light had the twister style effect. It's basically going to do a line AoE through the center, and then depending on the element, does one of, in the Savage mode, 3 different things. Here, just one of 2 different things. For the Lightning Burst Strike, it is going to do the line AoE through the middle, and then expand into a larger line AoE with the second hit. So you need to make sure you're out of both hits. For the Fire, it would do the knockback. Fortunately, this first one right here is always a Lightning Burnt Strike, and the second one is always a Fire Burnt Strike. This is a place where they easily could have tacked on some additional difficulty by making you pay attention to see if you had to do the knockback first or do the wide angle first, while also getting to the eventual safe side of the room, which I'll talk about here in a second. That's like it's those little details that they probably could have done more interesting things with on the first phase. And this is really the place where having the light burnt strike probably would have been an okay idea as well. Instead, again, they stuck strictly to the lightning and fire, which was just surprising. But fortunately, that also meant that this was, again, really easy to do on repeat, not frustrating, which when you're spending 12 to 16 hours a day, you really want that first phase to not be that frustrating to go through time and time again. I don't think the light mechanics would have made it much more frustrating, but I'm just glad the end result was something that I quite enjoyed. Now, one of the other images is actually using Turn of the Heavens. This is going to summon a bunch of AoEs, and the AoEs matching the element are actually going to glow. That's what this clone right here is doing, the one that's got the fire effects around it while we're dodging the Cyclonic Break. So at this point, I've communicated to the team that lightning is going to be safe because the fire AoEs that he just summoned, the ones on the left, those are going to expand and do much, much larger AoEs because Turn of the Heavens was fire-based. So we need to squeeze between all the lightning AoEs on the right-hand side of my screen in order to safely do the next mechanic. Then there's a fire burnt strike that's coming out as well. So you're going to see there's the lightning one. And so that's us dodging it. That's it expanding. And then there's another burnt strike happening. That's the fire burnt strike. That's going to, instead of expanding, it's going to do a knockback, but in an attempt to send you into the wall. So our goal is to find the side of the room with the unenhanced Turn of the Heaven AoEs that are on the ground, get knocked in between them, avoid being hit by them, and then there's one other mechanic. You have Bound of Faith. That's the tethers that are on 2 of us. You can see the prey markers, one on BN here and one on HH. And those are just fire AoEs. Those are going to lift those players into the air, and it's going to do a light party shared AoE between them. So we now also need to set up a way to make sure that 4 players on each side are in the stack. There's a lot of punishment in this fight for not having a minimum number of people in a stack, to the point where if you fail that, you get what's called the Mark of Mortality debuff. Not only do you die if you get 2 stacks of Mark of Mortality, but you also do 90% less damage. So you really don't want that in an ultimate. So making sure you have a system where 4 players take the intended 4-player light party mechanic is incredibly important. And these can target literally anybody. So this was something that made the Omega Protocol, quite annoying, was how many people could get random debuffs. But here, instead of it being like a 1, 2, 3, and 4 marker, it's effectively just 2 of these. So you set up light parties, and then you set up a priority system. So we did, well, actually, what we did is we did all DPS on one side, all supports on the other. So if there's one on a DPS, one on a support, like there is here, then we just stay in our stacks. But if 2 DPS get it, then you have a priority order of who's swapping to the other side. So like our Pictomancer was always going to be in one of the groups. He was never going to have to swap sides for anyone else. But if I get it and the Pictomancer has it, then I need to swap. But if anybody else shares it with me, they need to swap. So like it's basically just like D1 has the highest priority to swap and D4 will never swap. On the flip side, we would have the same with the healers. If it was on, I think, our Scholar, they will never swap sides and everybody else would swap before them. And that works its way down to the main tank, who will always swap if 2 supports have it. So it's just a basic prio system, only between 4 people. Very easy to do at a glance. My party list is actually in the order it's in because of the priority systems in this fight. And so I know that specifically for most mechanics, I'm going to be looking at BN, our Pictomancer, and that if we match, I need to swap with someone. And on their side, it's their responsibility to figure out who needs to swap so they can send somebody over. Very little communication needed, a basic prio system that a lot of players should be able to do in high-end content, and just needs to be explained at a very basic level to make sure that people understand. And then it just needs to be executed. So we get into the light parties here, and then the Burnt Strike comes out. We get knocked back. You cannot knockback resist this one. So you get knocked back in between. And then, you know, for fun, sometimes people run in, sometimes people don't. But the point is that we were in our light parties of 4, no marks of mortality. We are good to go. This immediately followed up with Burnished Glory, which does a massive amount of raid-wide damage, and a bleed. Now, when bleeds snapshot from raid-wides, they actually snapshot based on the amount of damage mitigation you had when you were hit by the AoE. So if you don't have good percentage mitigation, things that reduce damage by 10%, whether it be a reprisal on the boss, a feint, an addle, or something like a troubadour, then that dot tick is massive. And this dot tick I have seen do 60, 70, 80,000 damage in a single tick. So you really need to make sure your mitigation is on point for something like this Burnished Glory and the one that will come later, because otherwise your healers are just going to be in a nightmare scenario trying to keep up with the initial damage, plus the potential for a server tick to occur immediately and for you to basically take that extra, you know, however many thousands of points of damage from the bleed itself. So it can look really, really scary at times, but as long as the mitigation is there and your healers are ready with some heals, then that's all good. Now we come to the next priority style mechanic here. You can see us all lining up from north to south. You don't have to line up from north to south, but lining up in this is what's called a conga line, where basically we all stand together and our position relative to each other informs us about where we are going to go. So the northmost player, when they get something in this next mechanic, they're going to prioritize north unless somebody more north of them is also doing the same thing, in which case, you know, if it's just one other person, they're good. If it's 2 other people, then they need to head south. Specifically, that's for the people who don't get targeted by anything in this mechanic, and instead the players who do get targeted by something have specific spots that they are going to go. So while this bleed is ticking down, prey markers are going to start going out on the team. And you are going to get one from the boss itself, Fall of Faith, here at the start. And then 3 clones are going to spawn and also do one. And again, they can either be fire or lightning. When this executes on the player, when it wears off, the different effects will change depending on whether he's fire or lightning. If it's fire, then 3 other players need to stack and split the damage from a conal AoE. If it's lightning, then 3 players need to spread around the player and bait huge conal AoEs individually. If the lightning players overlap, they'll kill each other. If the lightning players hit someone that is not one of the 4 intended players, then that player is also going to die because they're probably dealing with the mechanic on the other side of the room. And of course, if you fail to have 3 people in the stack for the fire, then the player who was lifted, as well as the 3 players that were supposed to split the damage and whoever survive, if they even survive, will get Mark of Mortality. So it is checking for that with the fire debuff pretty much every time. Now there's 4 of these, and who it can target is completely random. So we sent the first and third one to the north side of the room, and we sent the second and fourth one to the south side of the room. Now, what was really funny during this mechanic is as people get it, you're going to see markers popping up over their head. A lot of people thought that we were using plugins for this. And in fact, from my understanding, to no surprise, the Party Finder does actually do this, which is mind-boggling to me. There's a macro you can make. In fact, I'll put it on the screen right now, and you can see it's my Shift 4 on the hotbar. This macro effectively adds an integer to the marker that you're putting over your head and self-marks. So we all had that same macro on our hotbar. And when we get marked, our job is to press it immediately in order to communicate to everyone else, you know, I'm 1, I'm 2, I'm 3, I'm 4. Now, admittedly, if somebody's late to doing it or forgets to do it, then that visual screws everything up. It's totally unnecessary to do it, but it's really good for the communication for everyone else to understand exactly what is happening and to make sure that everyone is in the exact spot. All the unmarked people just need to get either north or south to fill the light parties or lightning spreads relative to their position. So like, again, the northmost player is going to go north with the 1 and 3 people, and the southmost players are going to go to the 2 and 4 on the south side of the boss. And then it's just about resolving each mechanic, not forgetting the order, like fire, 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 lightning, or fire, lightning, lightning, fire, or lightning, 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 lightning. Like, it can be any combination of the 2 elements across the 4 different tethers. So you'll see that play out here as we all get marked and we all start marking ourselves one by one. And you can see, did we get oops all fire? Yes, we got what we call is oops all fire. Every single one of our tethers was fire. So the boss is going to go hit the first person on the other side. They're going to take a bunch of damage. Then you can see number 2 got lifted here, and we're all going to get blasted in that conal AoE. This is what the fire one looks like. So you really want to make sure that you're all stacked up for that one. And then the player who marked themselves with 3 and 4 is going to step forward into that spot before they get lifted into the air. And then we resolve the mechanic that way. The self-mark, again, really does help with the visuals, but it's also totally unnecessary. Regardless, the PF has already taken to using auto markers, which is disappointing that effectively, instead of normalizing the use of an in-game macro that is very simple, people would sooner just jump to that. Like, I get it. I get that the Party Finder is about mitigating the likelihood of random people screwing things up, but I don't know. This is just not a mechanic that I think needs anything other than player skill and player attention intervention. And quite frankly, if you can't do something as simple as pressing a button when a mark appears on you, then I'm scared for how you're going to do in the rest of the ultimate anyway. So it is what it is, though. It's not a terribly complicated mechanic. You do need mitigation and you do need healing for each of the hits. Fortunately, we just had our Astro Macro Cosmos for the first hit, and then all the mitigations that we have for the third and fourth hit just do the trick on their own, the reprisals or whatever else that we have. It's immediately followed by Burnished Glory. This one hurts just as much as the first one and needs percentage mit just like the first one. So everyone needs to be topped up, healed up, and they are good to go. And with that, we're really just at 1 mechanic remaining for the entirety of the phase. Now, Powder Mark Trail is going on the tanks. Again, they're going to have to make sure they do the Powder Mark related mechanic while the rest of the team does something else. So now there's just going to be a lone Burnt Strike and a series of towers on one side of the boss. Now, each and every one of these towers can require anywhere from 1 to 4 players, as long as the total number of players required adds up to 6. So basically, the party is going to deal with the 6 towers, and the 2 tanks are going to the other side of the room. We are then respectively dealing with the Burnt Strike, which will either be the fire knockback or the lightning, giga-wide Burnt Strike. Not complicated. We just set up a priority from top to bottom. We did H1, then D 1, 2, 3, 4, then H2. The reason being that way the healers are always in the north and south towers, and just the DPS need to worry about the flexing instead of having 1 healer rooted and 1 DPS rooted and 1 healer needing to flex. And it just allows you to look within your role and effectively, like, the healers don't need to do anything, and the DPS just basically count from north to south the number of towers until they hit their number. So like in this particular case, the tower to the north of me One of those towers is the healer, and then D1 and D2. I'm D3, so I know I take this like middle tower all to my lonesome, and D4 is going to take the south tower, which because it's already added up to 4, 5, and 6 need to be the south tower. I also see that it's fire, so I need to make sure I don't get hit by the initial AoE here, which you can see isn't that big. Our markers actually deliberately kind of cut off where the unexpanded burnt strike would be, so you can stand right on the edge of it, and then step in, get knocked back into our towers, and at the same time, you can see the explosions in the background. That is the tanks blowing up with the powder mark, which melees, you got being a little careful, because if you go back, if the tanks are a little too zealous, you may actually get too close while you're coming back in. But because the towers and the powder marks go off at the same time, you're more likely to have the issue of one of two. Either that the tanks recenter too quickly, and that creates a problem, which really only happens on fire. Or if you have a gap closer as somebody in a tower, remember to wait until the tower actually goes off. It's especially weird because on the fire tower, you effectively get knocked into the tower, and unless you knock back cancel with your gap closer, there's a good chance that you won't miss it, right? Lightning, on the other hand, when lightning's second half goes off, you're just sitting in the tower waiting. And I saw it during Prague. It was pretty easy for, when we first started getting here, like day one, when people were still getting comfortable with the fight, for someone to instinctually be like, all right, the AoE's gone, I'm going to gap close. Just make sure you don't do that, and it should be fine. At this point, it's just a DPS check to get through the rest of the fight. The next AoE is going to be a wipe if you don't actually kill the boss before it finishes. We actually deliberately tried to slow down here to make sure our 2-minute buffs would align better in later parts of the fight. Not really mandatory. We just liked doing that, but super unnecessary. The 2-minute buff windows in this fight are actually really kind to the player. And I have to admit, this fight really rewards good 1-minute buff timing and in management, especially with all the downtime that's going to be present throughout the various fights. So phase 1, again, it's really just like a Savage Plus. It's nothing like Looper. It's nothing like Thornton phase. And I know Thornton's phase 2 and that phase 1 is technically the Knights for DSR. For the sake of the fight and what your actual progression looks like, when you wipe, you go back to the first fight. I'm going to call Thornton phase 1, and this is way less frustrating than both of those. That being said, if DSR and top didn't exist, this would be pretty in line with most of the other phase 1s. Twintania is a little bit of a anomaly because twisters are kind of a big meme. But Garuda and even Living Liquid are not that much different. Like Living Liquid is a lot about just getting to bait conal AoEs. And this is also kind of just a lot about getting to bait conal AoEs. Like the dolls are the biggest meme in all of Living Liquid, and also making sure all the throttles are assumed. But it's really just a matter of baiting conal AoEs from the boss and baiting conal AoEs from the puddles. And this is so similar to that I would actually put this and Living Liquid on very similar difficulty curves in terms of player experience. So if you've never done T, this phase kind of comes off as harder. If you've never done E11, this phase comes off as a decent bit harder. But it is a direct execution phase that gets you kind of going. And again, just thank goodness it's a good phase to do on repeat, because otherwise this would have been such a miserable experience to go through for days and days and days and days and days. Not to mention you get the meme of only I can protect her every single time. So solid first phase, definitely could have done more. I was also surprised not to see it's not Turn of the Heavens. I think it's Right of the Heavens, which is basically giant rectangles that fire out AoEs, and the AoE expands depending on if it's fire or lightning. I really thought they were going to use those as well, maybe hide them inside of the prismatic. But they're also not something I miss necessarily. I really think the light mechanic missing is the more notable thing because of how frequently you would see the light mechanics in the original fight for elemental break and so on and so forth. I think it also could have been maybe interesting to have a light cyclonic break, because in theory, a light cyclonic break would effectively be 8 spreads, 8 baited AoEs, and 8 moving out of those same AoEs. That being said, because oh yeah, I'm sorry, not that wouldn't have been light cyclonic break. That would have been light cyclonic break would have been actually light cyclonic breaks, yeah, still would have been good. Because it would have been all the players grouping up into those light parties based on where the initial baits were, and then getting out of them for the subsequent hits after you've taken the AoEs together. They probably could have done some stuff with the elemental breaks. But again, I didn't have that high of an expectation for this as a first phase because the Savage fight is so direct and basically leans on the same three mechanics for the entirety of the fight. So they pretty much captured that here. And for all intents and purposes, it was fun. So it just wasn't anything spectacular. It was fun, and I'm not dreading doing it in the coming months. Got to get those weekly clears. I want them weapons. So yeah, we slow down the kill here, and then we immediately go into Shiva, which I thought was maybe a possibility. I thought they might do something a little bit else, save this for a little bit later. But this phase is both really intimidating and really not. Quadruple slap here, kind of funny. It's a double tank buster, which we all know nobody does. Everyone just uses tank invulns on that. That's been the case for a really long time. And it gives this physical vuln that lasts longer than the invuln, but it can be assuned. So even as a bard, sometimes I would meme and I would just use Wanderer's Pain on the main tank. But we didn't even assume to that. They would just invuln both the hits, and then the other tank would just swap afterwards, and then you just leave it. So funny that they even bothered with it, in all honesty. They probably could have done one other quadruple slap somewhere in here to maybe just burn tank resources, or at least make you consider if you wanted to invuln both of them. But honestly, we would have just invulned both of them because there isn't very many good opportunities to invuln in this fight, at least not enough that both your tanks need to keep burning their invulns. You kind of just use them because you can. Our paladin started burning their invuln in phase 1 on the Powder Mark Trail cast just because they could. And it was so irrelevant whether or not they did that they're just like, yeah, I'll just hallowed ground. And that's it, because they were otherwise just holding it and not using it on anything for a very, very, very long time. Now, Diamond Dust, basically just a bit harder than the Savage version, and definitely a good bit longer. So the boss has a tell here, either cleave or reap. Reap means it is scythe kick, and cleave means it is axe kick. Now, of course, the aggro list also shows you the cast bar, as you can see right here. And this determines how you are going to do the Diamond Dust. Now, in Savage, we basically did Diamond Dust a single way, and it was just get into position and then get knocked back and dodge ground AoEs, and that was it. Here, there's the consideration of where are the first AoEs that are rotating around the room. Are we allowed to be inside of the boss or out? And on top of that, the boss actually does a cleave to the 4 nearest players. You need 4 players baiting, 4 players placing these AoEs on the ground, which will expand later, so you really need them to be in the right spot. Do I need to be in or out? And I have to not get hit by these icicles. So it's actually a lot of elements stacked on top of each other, like 4 or 5 different things immediately. And you need to tell where you need to be able to go in probably under a second and a half. Now, fortunately, because the icicles are always opposite of each other, we basically just made whichever icicle was between 1 and B. That was like our north, our relative north. And we just basically sent the circle AoEs either in or out, depending on whether it was scythe or axe, relative to that, like intercardinally. So like, because the icicle north is on B, and that's now our relative north, these would go to 2, 3, 4, and 1, all the circle AoEs. Whereas the baits, we did 2 different baits. I would probably adjust that if we really needed to, which I don't think we do, to make static baits a thing. So fortunately, this is axe kick. So I'll show, this actually is the perfect example for me to show you what we would have done. So on top of that, we then broke up into our pairs that we had for the previous phase. So like, I'm paired with the tank right there. And if I had the circle AoE, he would be baiting the cleave from the boss. And if he has a circle AoE, then I bait his cleave for the boss. So when we do our axe kick baits, we completely avoid the relative north and south icicle drops. And we do these kind of like almost flank-esque baits, relative east and west baits, as whichever role is not dealing with the circle mechanic. The only change I would have made to our strat is that when we're doing scythe, if you look at my mouse cursor, instead of it being like this, we'd have like me here, another player here, another player here, and another player here. So like relative north, south, east, and west to that north icicle. And then this circle AoE would actually just be in right about here. So they would start here-ish, wait for the scythe kick, and then dip out and drop it right here, which is very similar to the positions that we used in the Savage encounter. What I would change is I would put both, for scythe kick, I would put both the circle AoEs right here, north and south, waiting for the scythe kick to go off, and then do these same exact style of baits. And it still has the same end result, but it just makes the positioning consistent for these conal baits as they come out. So those players, you know, we do our conal baits, axe kick is done. The players who needed to drop their snowflake baits do so. And then we split up into light parties. We're going to get a bunch of AoEs. Now, these AoEs do not require 4 people, but their damage is scaled as if you're going to be hit as 4 people. We have survived it with 3. So, you know, we've recovered a death coming into this next part, but we are going to have to do light party splits, and there's going to be 4 of them back to back. So the boss is going to knock us back right here. I believe knockback resist does work on this one, but we, you know, for the most part, just opted into riding the knockback into the edge of the room, and we're getting knocked into wherever those first icicles were being placed. I was going to say baited, but they're not baited, they're placed. And we just need to make sure we don't get hit by the snowflake AoEs that are coming out that we drop. So because of the way we drop them, the very edge of the room right here on both sides is going to be safe. So you see right here, it creates this like safe triangle. We could even drop them a little bit further in if we wanted to and make an even bigger triangle of safety, but we just decided it wasn't really worth it. It made more sense to just leave the icicle baits, leave the snowflake baits, basically at the wall, because the other 4 players needed to be the closest players to bait the conals, the ones that weren't marked. So if I go back here, you'll see that I'm standing close to this line, which is where the edge of the axe kick will be. And this player is further back towards the wall. This is so they don't bait the conal AoE that comes out right here, which will bait on the 4 nearest players. So yeah, in this case, all the DPS are the ones actually responsible for this. And yeah, that's, you know, we could have them move in afterwards and bait it closer to the middle, but then that creates, you know, room for error. Like, what if one player doesn't make it as far, or they all don't drop it in the exact right spot, or something like that? It just wasn't worth it when we could just stick them on the outside of the room all the way and then just plant and then go back to the middle of the room and do the knockback like you see us do a second later. Now, after this, a reflection of the oracle is actually going to be in a random cardinal or intercardinal around the room. So we need to make sure that by the end of these 4 baits, we are as close to being directly in front of and directly behind that oracle's reflection. The reason being is we're going to have to do an ice slide mechanic, and we either need to end up in front or behind. If we're at a bad angle, it's really easy to either not slide far enough, or, you know, to get clipped, or even to just slide right into the wall. So we basically had to have a few different call outs here. We had to have, like, you know, let's say that where the icicles ended up were only 90 degrees from where our endpoints are. We would be like, you know, clockwise slow rotation. So that way we would make sure we don't drop these like too fast. We're like sprinting around the room, and then we drop them directly behind or directly in front of the oracle's reflection. Or it would be like, you know, let's say that we go out and the boss is directly to our right. We need to know that we're doing a counterclockwise rotation so that we, again, don't drop them directly in front of or directly behind. So it was basically just always go clockwise and then adjust your speed to how fast you need to actually rotate around the arena based on the position of the reflection. Or go counterclockwise, at which case it's always the same pace. It's what we called medium pace, where you're going to basically cover like 270 degrees of the room between these 4 baits. So you get to go kind of fast. For this one, I believe we have a slow bait. So the reflection is on... no, the reflection's right there, actually. We did a slow bait, but that was actually a medium-paced bait. But it was clockwise all the same. So the reflection is here in the middle and is actually transforming into the Ice Shiva and giving us the thin ice effect on the ground, which is where we're going to slide. What you can't see very well, and I don't think I get a good vision of it. Actually, you can. You see this other... this is the actual boss, mind you, this other instance of the boss. This is the boss that was ice becoming light. and you have to make sure you're looking away from that. It's very easy to just not look at that clone, but I know what a lot of us were doing is we were treating it as if we had to look away from both of them, even though you only need to look away from this oracle on the outside. So don't worry about looking away from this one. Look away from this one. Granted, generally to look at this one, you have to look at the middle of the room. So, you know, in a lot of cases, you don't want to do that because if you're looking through the middle of the room, there's a good chance you're actually looking at the reflection or at the actual boss itself as they transform. However, if you have, let's say that this instance over here was like right here, was basically right next to the boss, then looking through the middle of the room for that team would be perfectly okay. Most people I know aren't comfortable doing that ever. They don't want to ever even be in the habit of looking through the middle of the room in case that screws them up and they just get stunned. So you just look out kind of east-west or directly out, and that works just fine. So now we have, what's the exact name? Twin Stillness or Twin Silence. Twin Stillness is going to be behind the boss as safe first, and then you have to be in front of the boss because the boss is going to turn around and swing behind her afterwards. Silence would be you start in front of the boss and end behind the boss. So one of the groups of 4 here is going to have to slide as soon as they see the cast bar, and then you're all going to have to slide away once the cast bar finishes. So you saw this is Stillness. Well, I mean, you can't see it anymore. Let me back up. There you go. You can see this is Twin Stillness, which means we all need to be behind the boss. So you'll see that we actually slide very early. So it's pretty important to slide early because the way that this snapshots is maybe a second to a second and a half after that animation actually finishes. So if you don't go immediately, especially if it's Twin Silence where you have to slide all the way across the room to get behind the boss, there's a good chance you're going to get clipped and you're going to die in a really embarrassing way. It's going to look like you were like way out of it in advance, but you'll just die on the other side of the room. And you really don't want that. So with that, Diamond Dust is done. You just have to make sure you do that slide and do it one more time right here. See, we got Twin Stillness. We're all behind. Soon as the cast bar is gone, go, wait, done. And that's half the phase done already. So with the next part, when we come back to it, we get a Hallowed Ray. Now, this was probably the strangest mechanic pretty much the entire time. All this is doing is A, forcing you to burn a bit of mitigation, and B, body checking you in a really indirect way. If people died to Twin Silence or Twin Stillness, then Hallowed Ray becomes scary. But most of the time, even with only 6 people, sometimes even with 5, it's sometimes feasible to survive it. So a group that's like well prepared really doesn't even feel the threat of this Hallowed Ray, regardless of the fact that it's meant to, again, act as that pseudo body check without being a literal body check. It honestly, if they really wanted it to be a pure body check, they would have made it give you a mark of mortality with less than 8 people. Whether or not I'm glad that they did it, body checks are such like a weird thing to balance because like having no body checks effectively means that no mechanic needs to be done correctly, right? Because if you can survive with like, oh, 1 person died to that mechanic, get them up and continue. 2 people died to that mechanic, get up, continue. Then you could effectively not ever really know the fight and just get through it, right? But with too many body checks, the game becomes frustrating because there's basically no room for you as a player to express the skill in recovering. This fight is very recoverable in a lot of spots, and in some spots is nigh unrecoverable. So it really balances the two in a way that I think is healthy, which on-release ultimates are rarely healthy when it comes to body check related stuff. Most of the time, they're incredibly strict. I think probably one of the only exceptions to that is like Ukab and Uwu. T, if you're missing somebody at some points in T, it literally falls apart so quickly. In DSR, like sometimes it's not even body checks, but the way it's designed is in such a way that like one mistake means death, or at least it was on content. And there's really not a whole lot of room to recover. And in top, no. Like there's almost not a single place in that entire fight where if somebody dies, you're going to come out and actually like win, especially in the final phase where if somebody dies in the final phase, like they are actually just repeat dead. Like they do that. They make like players do less damage in UCOB, or, you know, it becomes harder to manage your priority system in DSR with the auto attacks, or ooh, it speeds up the enrage, right? Like there's mechanics that punish the deaths in very unique ways. But But top, it just like deletes you. Like if you're gone, then you're going to die repeatedly and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's incredibly frustrating. So they don't really do that here. There's a good balance of like, wow, I can't believe we managed to recover that. But it feels like you earned it here. Like it's done in just the right way where only a really good team is going to pull it off. And it's not something that you can just do because that's the thing that you do. I don't know if I'm saying it in a way that's understandable, but it's why this fight's progression also went so quick, because there's a lot of recovering pulls to see the next mechanic and get practice on it in ways that are traditionally not possible. Like all the damage downs in this fight are 90% damage downs. And so if a player gets that, they just run into the wall and you resurrect them as long as it's a decent time for them to do it. And that's better than letting them have the damage down. Like getting a damage down is effectively, almost, it's more than 3 times worse than just dying and rezzing. Like 25% for weakness versus 90% for the damage down. It's like, as long as you can get away with it, you'll take that every time. But also, if you just get a damage down and you just need to see the next mechanic, it's not the end of the world, because practicing the next mechanic might be more important to you than beating the phase at that time. There's just so much room for you to express your skill and recover, as well as continue learning future mechanics in a way that doesn't cheapen the fight. And it's crazy to me that they subsequently made the fight a lot easier because they did that, and managed to make the fight feel incredibly fair and rewarding if you manage to pull that kind of stuff off. So that's just like, I had to go on this tangent because it's such an impressive thing that they managed to pull off here. Even if it does make the progression shorter for a lot of people, I don't think anyone's really going to complain about that because it feels earned. So all that I got off Hallowed Ray, which is supposed to be a body check that isn't really a true body check. That's all it's really achieving here. Then we finally go back into hitting the boss because it's been forever. And we get Mirror Mirror. Now, Mirror Mirror here is going to basically just be the same mechanic twice with some slight boss movement. One of these mirrors is what we call a blue mirror. It means when the boss does their next mechanic, it is immediately going to do the exact same mechanic at the exact same time. So in this case, the boss does Scythe Kick. It's always Scythe Kick, and quite frankly, I thought they could have made a double axe kick situation work here. It would have been very, very hard, like disproportionately hard to Scythe Kick, but they technically could have done it. I think the main reason they decide not to is because the one place they can use axe kick here, the ground, the floor of the arena tells you where the edge of the axe kick is. Any other result doesn't really do that. Now, you could argue that Scythe Kick technically benefits from the same thing, but Scythe Kick actually, in the earlier part, if you get Scythe Kick, it doesn't actually, the arena is irrelevant. It doesn't use the ground markings of the arena. Like, you need like your own kind of mental indicator for it. So that's probably why they're okay with doing that here and not Axe Kick. But they definitely could have, and that would have made this a lot more difficult. So the boss is using Scythe Kick. So just like with the first mechanic, Axe Kick and Scythe Kick come with those conal AoEs that bait on the 4 nearest players. But because the mirror is also doing that, it means all 8 players have to bait a cone. But they also have to bait a cone in such a way that it doesn't hit the players on the other side of the room. So opposite to us is the boss with the Scythe Kick, and the 4 melees and tanks over there are going to bait them, just on the outside of the arena. We need to bait them kind of to the sides over here to make sure that, if we fire them straight through the boss, it's going to kill everyone on the other side of the room. It's a cone. It's going to get wider. So you can see right there, we leave this giant open spot while they do the bait on the other side. Then there's 2 red mirrors. Now, the red mirrors basically do the exact same mechanic on a small delay. You can even see in the party list here the reflected Scythe Kick that's going off from the 2 frozen mirrors that haven't done anything yet. So then one group has to do one mirror and the other group has to do the other. And it's the same idea, but because the mirrors are 90 degrees apart, you can't fire them in the same type of pattern. So we need to leave like a big open space. So 3 people kind of hover between middle and the side away from the other party. And one person aims it it's just kind of directly towards the wall. I think in reality, you could actually do all 4 people on one side away from the other party. And that eliminates a bit of an executional element. So like I can squeeze over here a little bit like more towards this person. Like I've got like a little bit of room, and they could go through here, and then on the other side they could do the same thing, and I think it would be just fine. We did run into the issue where this person, if they were not really close to the wall, it actually would kill the person on the other side. And that's true for the melees as well. One of the tanks is aiming in our direction. You know, it kind of cuts off. You can see they intersect right here. This looks like a ton of space, and realistically, it's way more than enough space. But I'm just saying that we could have made an even bigger safe spot, and I think lowered some of the risk if our final AoE was right here and was going out like this. Like, look at all the space they would have had if we had just aimed all 4 AoEs like along this side. And if they did the same thing, like it would have been way safe, and we would have had a ton of open space. But this is what we opted into, and that's perfectly fine. Now, the boss uses Banish 3, just like in the normal mode. It's either going to have 1 orb over her head or 4 orbs over her head. 1 orb means pairs, and 4 orbs means spread. Not any different than it was in Savage. So we see it's 4 orbs, so we all spread. Simple as that. And then it goes into the last major mechanic, Light Rampant. Now, Light Rampant suffers from what I call overcomplicatedness in this encounter. Sometimes the less things that there are, or the less of one thing that there is, the more complex the result ends up being. That's because when you give the players very little that, you know, is mandatory, it creates open-endedness on how to solve it. When you give them too many things, it effectively creates restraints on what possible ways you could have to solve it. And Light Rampant kind of falls victim to that here in a way that almost makes it easier than the original Light Rampant. So in this case, 6 players are going to be tethered together, and this tether must be stretched very far. Two of those tethered players are going to have a beacon that does a 4-player split damage AoE when it expires. Any less than that will give Mark of Mortality. And then 2 players are going to get marked with baited AoEs. Very similar looking to the baited AoEs from the Diamond Dust mechanic, the Light Party stacks, but these don't deal damage. They just give a magic vuln. So they need to bait these AoEs away from the tower players, because if it hits a tower player as the tower is hitting, it'll kill them because it gives them a magic vuln, and then they take damage from the tower and it kills them, and then all the Light Rampants explode. Now, when we were first experiencing this, we went, okay, we have 2 beacons that are always tethered to each other. We're going to use one of those beacons as our relative north, and then count clockwise or counterclockwise from those. And that gave us a solution that created what is effectively the Seal of Orichalcos pattern. It creates, you know, this I don't know if it's called a sectogram or a hexagram or whatever it is, but it creates a pattern where all of the tethers are stretched incredibly far. It's very similar to the Sigma, the Run Dynamis Sigma from Top. However, like anything else, some people always find a way to make it super easy. So what we eventually, well, I shouldn't say we, a group figured out. I don't know who the original person who figured it out was, but what we ended up doing was this. We basically make what's the shape called? Man, my geometry is way off in this particular case. We make a hexagon, and we effectively origami the hexagon in such a way that no matter what, the mechanic resolves itself. So, you know, we all stand in front of a tower, and it creates the hexagon shape. And then the northeast and northwest players effectively swap, and the north and south players swap. And regardless of where the beacons are, it resolves the mechanic in exactly the way it's supposed to. While the 2 orb players just need to make sure they don't kill each other, kill themselves, and that they can actually drop it in such a way that lets them finish resolving the mechanic after. Because we're going to need those players in those Light Party stacks on the 2 beacon players. It's like, it just works. Like, I don't know what else to say about it. And it eliminates pretty much all of the difficulty, all of the randomness, all of the things that you perceive could go wrong. It eliminates all of them. You just need to make sure you understand if you're in one of those positions that needs to swap, or if you end up in a position that just walks to the outside of the room, which in our case was southeast and southwest. You could technically fold southeast and southwest and instead of northeast and northwest, and it literally creates the same result, but we swapped northeast and northwest. So you'll see here, there's a player who so let me back up a second. So because there's 2 players with the orbs, we need to make sure that all of the players understand which tower is their initial tower. So I'm in front of the northwest tower, the Picto's in front of the northeast tower, and then we have a player east and west, a player southwest, southeast, and then a player south. So the southwest, southeast, and south players, very similar to us on this side of the room, we start in front of towers. We basically just shift over based on who gets the orbs to make sure we're filling a tower. For some people, they may have to go counterclockwise. For some people, they may have to go clockwise. But you can see, I see that the northmost player gets an orb, so I immediately shift over. That informs the person who's west to shift over as well and walk in front of the tower. Now, I'm north. That player, the Picto on 2, is northeast, and the healer is northwest. We basically know all the most important positions. As long as the south person knows they're in front of the south tower, we basically just go, okay, now we just swap. And it just creates the perfect shape. And that's it. You just get this little like star looking, this 6-sided star, monk joke, pattern here while the AoEs are being dropped in the middle. And you just need to make sure they're stretched far enough and you're good to go. Now, after this, some orbs are going to appear, and the first orb will appear and then explode, and then the second orb that appears will explode right after. So we need to make sure we get out of the first AoE while all stacking up. This is kind of an important thing that makes sure that the movement is a little bit stricter, in that the players that were dropping the AoEs in the middle need to drop their 5 AoEs in such a way that doesn't kill the tower player and gives them ample time to stack up with the other 3 players that were making the star pattern on the north or south side of the room, and subsequently get out of whichever orb is first, wait, and then dodge back into the safe spot. It's a very quick movement, but again, it's a very easy movement. If you have sprint, it's really good for this kind of moment. And if you don't, honestly, it just means get used to baiting your AoEs a little bit closer to the center. Like the person who baited these AoEs, baited them in a pattern that puts them really far away from the stack, and we have the far pattern. In theory, that should be scary. But look, it was perfectly fine here. They just sprinted, made it to the group, and then we all just moved over, and it was perfectly fine. Because of the Mark of Mortality, you really want to make sure nobody misses that stack, and it snapshots when the debuff itself falls off. So as soon as you see that 0, if you're sure everyone's on top of you, you can start moving and making sure that you get safe of the orb in that exact moment. Now, as soon as you start doing the other movement, the light rampant tethers go away, and there is a tower that requires 4 people in the middle of the room. First of all, do not run through the puddles. They are starting to disappear, but they have not all disappeared yet. There's still 3 of them left at this point. And if you step into them, they will give you a bleed that will kill you. I think a tank can survive they could technically survive a tick, but it's a 30-second dot that does like 100,000 damage a tick. You do not want to have to heal a tank through that. And if anyone dies during this, it's basically over. If a tether dies, then it breaks and kills everyone. If a player with two stacks of the what's the name of this debuff? I always forget what it is. It's like light something, light touched, I want to say. Light steeped. There it is. Yeah. So if a player without a light steeped, without 2 light steep stacks is here, if they die, they can't do it. They can't do this tower. All the people with 2 stacks of light steeped need to be the ones to do this tower, or the mechanic will fail. So you literally cannot afford a single death here unless you are able to recover it incredibly, incredibly quickly. Now, on top of that, the boss is going to do a spread or a spread or a pair AoE here again, exactly the same as they did right before Light Ramp. It's no big deal. We got the spread mechanic here. And then you've got House of Light. House of Light will fire a cone at every player, and it's basically one final check. If any player has 4 stacks of Light Steeped and they get hit by House of Light, it's a wipe. But in normal mode, in Savage, House of Light would only target players who were alive. So if a player was going to wipe the group because of House of Light, they could actually run into the wall or jump off the arena in that case, and it would save the group. It was better to die there. Here, if a player is dead when House of Light goes off, they will double up on somebody else, and it guarantees 5 stacks. So this is one mechanic that requires absolute perfection. just like it did back in the day. It just has some solutions that are very, very simple. Not to say that the old Light Rampant solutions were complicated, but what the community had enough different ways of doing it and enough like error that it felt almost harder than what we have here. And that's pretty wild to think that the Savage mode Light Rampant in some ways is harder, but that's also not that surprising. So Hello World in top, arguably the Hello World in Savage is harder than the Hello World in Ultimate. And again, it's because the more you complicate something, the more rules that have to be followed, it just limits what the total solutions can be. It's arguable whether that makes it easier to execute. And I think that's kind of what Ultimate's banking on. It's that regardless, it is asking for perfection in a fight that is 20 minutes long. So if them having something that might be like, it might have to follow a strict rule, but once you know the strict rule, you can it's not really very variable. That's really kind of the trade-off that you get. And I'd say it's very subjective whether or not you think that's a better design or you think the idea of it being more free-form and having a lot of randomness is better design. Top definitely comes into a big discussion point for that because a lot of players are not very big fans of the top design and like the true randomness of a lot of the elements that are present there. But this is one of those cases where it just got almost easier because of the solution. It definitely didn't feel that way when we were doing the whole counting clockwise and counterclockwise bit. I struggled with that a lot. This was my weakest mechanic in the fight because of that particular strategy. Once we did the whole folding origami strat here, it became one of the easiest mechanics in the entire fight for me. And I think a lot of other people felt the same way. We like almost never had mistakes for the rest of our prog once that was the strategy that we adopted. So it's very, very interesting to see how that ended up working out because I was ill prepared for it. I was ill prepared for how simple that was actually going to end up feeling when all was said and done. But the House of Light here basically marks the end of the phase, and the Usurper of Frost, or Shiva if you just like to call her, just needs to be under 20%. Now, I don't want to talk too much about it because I'm going to make a separate video about it altogether. But let me tell you, man, Pictomancer makes those under 20% checks. Well, I mean, look at the boss HP. 14%, 13%, 12%, we were 8% ahead of the check. If you don't have a Pictomancer, that gets a little scarier. And if the Pictomancer dies or anyone dies, that, again, gets mildly scarier, but not really at the same time. It's just pretty funny because I feel like it was a big, Pictomancer OP kind of moment, in my opinion. I don't know. Like I said, I'm going to have a whole separate video about Pictomancer and this fight in particular and talking about the balance of that job versus the fight design. But we'll get to that when we get to it. Trust me. So that marks the end of the phase. And we go into this little intermission phase. Now, everyone is wondering, where's the puzzle of this ultimate? I got to be clear. Ultimate hasn't really had a puzzle since the Enigma Codex in T, and before that, the Awoken status in that of Uwu. Basically, this phase is one giant caster LB bait that you very quickly realize is incorrect because it invalidates all the mechanics that start happening pretty much immediately as long as you caster LB. So what's happening here is there's 4 crystals of darkness and 4 crystals of light. There's also an ice veil in the middle of the room, and you have to break the ice veil before the phase ends. Otherwise, it's an instant wipe. So what most groups were doing immediately was caster LBing as soon as the ice veil was available to target. And that would, you'd get through the fight. And it was fine. You'd get through the phase. You'd go on to the next phase. Everything would seem fine. However, it was very suspicious that if you aimed a crystal of darkness AoE at a crystal of light, the crystal of light basically became nigh unkillable. And also, if you only killed the crystal of light, Gaia would actually help you kill the ice veil in the middle of the room. She would do 50% of its health in damage right before the end of the Endless Ice Age cast. So it was figured out pretty quickly that you probably need to let the crystals of darkness survive. And that was correct. If you kill the crystals of darkness in this phase, then a mechanic does not appear in a later phase. And if that mechanic doesn't appear, then you can't even do it correctly in the first place. You have to do the later mechanic correctly. And if you don't, then that leads to a bad ending as well. It's very similar to in DSR Double Dragons. If you killed Thornton in phase 5, then at the end of Double Dragons, Estinian just gets possessed by Nidhogg and then he just wipes you. It's very similar to that if you destroy these dark crystals. And that's really the extent of the puzzle in DSR. And that's really the extent of the puzzle here. So we have the ranged players baiting the conal AoEs from the crystals of darkness, while the melee players each focus on a crystal of light, the melees and the tanks, I should say. And we all just kill the crystal of lights. Like, this was targeting in this phase was a disaster. It was probably the worst experience of the entire ultimate. Because sometimes all 4 crystals of light are on the aggro list, like you're seeing right here. And sometimes they aren't. Sometimes you have to like kill one before another one will pop up because like the crystals of darkness are pushing the crystals of light off of the aggro list. And you're also trying to like kill all of them pretty equally because it's kind of dangerous if you're a melee player to go from one crystal of light to the other, at least to go to them very quickly. So yeah, targeting in this phase was a disaster. Not to mention the ice veil itself. The target for it is like off the ground. So you need to like aim your camera up in order to either tab or click it. So it's just easier to click everything from the party list here instead of actually trying to tab target around and do it that way. So on top of that, the crystals of darkness, their AoE is bugged. Sometimes the AoE will get filtered underneath the ice effects on the ground and it becomes like 90% obscured. So I was basically staring at the aggro list. I was using it to target. I was using it to track the AoEs. I was using it to track everything. I didn't even like look at my character pretty much the entire time throughout this phase. I don't think I got the bug in this pull, but it was a pain. But you can see me like, you know, occasionally like I'm targeting this crystal of light that's second, and then I think it actually dies. Yeah, I go to target the other one and then it dies, and now the ice veil is the only thing left. So now we just need to finish baiting these crystals of darkness. Keep in mind, if a crystal of darkness shoots the ice veil as well, it will also basically make it unkillable unless it's already under 50% of its HP. So at this point, we just need to kill the ice veil before before it finishes casting. But like if you get it to under 50% at any point, then you're basically, you know, scot-free. And that's me just doing fun little tech. Yeah, you didn't need to do what I did there. The little repelling shot. I was like, oh, you know what? This will be cool. I'll just like slide around the side of the crystal. And that's where I actually needed to end up anyway. So it worked out. So yeah, by making sure all 4 of the dark crystals survive, Gaia does about 50% of the ice veil's health and her necklace stays intact. That's actually the key thing that happens here, is that Gaia's necklace doesn't break if the dark crystals survive. And that's the thing that needs to be effectively saved for later. Now, once the phase is over, however, Oracle of Darkness is the next phase. So, you know, Gaia is immediately going to run into some hard times. You do take a raid wide here. And at this point, we have no use for the LB3. We actually just started sending the LB3 here because sending it any later than this phase does run a risk of not having it when you need it later. We didn't even need it to beat this phase, but LB3ing here definitely made this check. It just effectively eliminated any sort of prog problems we could have. This is a full uptime phase with a lot of mechanics happening at the same time. So if you're going to fail an individual phase's DPS check, it's actually most likely to be this one, if not the very final phase. All of the other phases, the DPS check is actually incredibly easy to hit. Again, I think largely because we have Pictomancer, but all the same, they're just not as difficult. They're not top DPS checks. It definitely feels like they expected you to maybe not, you know, have to worry about crit rate as much here. As long as you're potting, as long as you're playing well, then you're good. But if you have a Pictomancer, you're like me and you didn't pot until this phase. I didn't pot phase 1 or 2 unless somebody died. That was my rule throughout Prague. So I bought like 1,200 potions. I only used like 250 in all of Prague. Now, you might say I'm a scumbag for not potting every phase, but we were stopping DPS phase 1, and anything under 20% boss HP in phase 2 is a waste. So I just like to think I was efficient. more than anything else. And again, if anyone died, I had it on standby, so I could effectively do something to help make up for the DPS loss, which even then sometimes wasn't necessary. If it wasn't the Pictomancer who died, most of the time it was fine. Going into this phase, you instantly get 1 HP'd. That's just toxic, by the way. But it does mean you can actually do some limit break cheese here at the start. So after we do that melee LB3, we let our HP kind of sit low for a little bit, and then our healers do like all the, you can see the limit break just ticking up from all the healing that we're getting. So just look at our limit break on the top left, and that gives you a good idea. Like, look, it gets spent, and then the healing, bam, 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 bam. Like, it's not that big of a deal. It's not like we need that limit break in any capacity, but it was very satisfying to do. Now, ultimate relativity. This is one of the mechanics that looks very scary, but much like Hello World and the Omega Protocol, it just gives you a set number of rules, and you just need to be very quick at doing each of those rules in the order they are given to you. There are going to be 7 players that get a fire debuff and 1 player that gets an ice. The fire debuffs are broken into short, medium, and long fires, whereas the ice is always going to be 20 seconds. If it's on a support, it's going to have a spread AoE that they have to place later, and if it's on a DPS, it's going to have, I believe, a water. It's going to have a gaze. Sorry, it's going to have a look away mechanic on it that you're going to have to place later. So very predictable in a sense. There's also 5 players with a 15-second rewind and 3 players with a 25-second rewind. And then there's some spreads, some stack markers, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Basically, every player that with a fire AoE that's about to go off needs to get away from the party. Every other player needs to be in the middle of the room. Like, that's it. If your fire is about to, like, don't even worry about all these stack. We see like all these like stack markers right here, the 10, 20, and 30. They're completely irrelevant, because the only thing that matters is that everybody except the fire players that are about to explode with the same timers are out of the group. So you can see there's a 10-second stack, and then 1, 2, just 2 of these short. Also, this spread player is by extension considered a short just because of the assignment and the way that it works. So they get kind of grouped into that. But the whole point is that first AoE, 6 people are going to be in it. So the two 10-second ones are out. The second one, the 2 20-second players are going to be out. And the third one is going to have the 3 30-second players out. Now, if you have any more players that miss the stack, so let's say there's only 5 players in that short stack for some reason, you will get Mark of Mortality. So it is hard checking to make sure the right number of people are in each stack. The rewinds basically are just where you're going to want to be for your final debuff. So you can see I have this water looking debuff. That's a stack marker. And that stack marker also is a Mark of Mortality check. If that does not hit exactly 4 people, then it will give Mark of Mortality. So have to make sure that that's correct. And then the spread players and the gaze players are basically just like the stack marker, and the gaze players are all kind of loosely huddled up in the same spot and all looking away from each other. And the spread players are all away from the stack and also looking away from the gazes. So we kind of did this really close to the center of the room. It doesn't leave a lot of room for error, but it worked for us and we got it down, and it allowed everybody to stay really close to the boss. So it worked well. But your rewind is literally just when you are placing the final mechanic on your debuff bar. So what we do right from the get-go is we have a priority system to determine who is going to stand next to which stoplight. And we basically did it in such a way where our stoplight is where all of our mechanics are going. Our rewind is in the direction of that tower. Our spread is in the direction of that tower. And when we have to bait that, I keep calling it a tower, the stoplight. And when we have to do a bait from that stoplight that's going to do a certain type of AoE, that's the stoplight we're going to be responsible for. Now, in order to determine that, the lengths of the debuffs come into play here. So there's, again, a short fire, a medium fire, and a long fire. The ice player is either going to be short relative for supports or long relative for DPS, just because of the debuffs they end up getting. They either have a short rewind or a long rewind. The supports get a short rewind and the DPS get a long rewind. We then had supports do a priority system from the north stoplight counterclockwise based on their debuff timers, and the DPS northeast clockwise with the same thing. Now, if you are a short player, a player with a short fire or a short rewind in the case of the ice, then then your tower needs to be a stoplight. I keep calling it tower. It needs to be a stoplight with no tether. That's just because of the timing and the way that it works. The stoplight with no tether will be the second stoplight to go off. So the short fire goes off, the debuff that you get from the fire exploding goes away, and then your stoplight needs to be baited. The medium person gets the blue/purple tether you see me going to. I'm a medium fire in this case. That's because that's going to be the last stoplight that goes off. So my medium fire will go off. Then I can get my stoplight at the very end. And the long fires get the yellowish one. I'm colorblind, so work with me here. The yellowish tether that's going to the stoplight, because that one's going to basically go almost immediately. So they're going to do their stoplight first, and then later in the phase, they'll bait their fire away from the group. So it's all about the relation to the fire timers. And again, because you have to do it in that order, it greatly simplifies all of this. The toughest thing is remembering when your fire is going off, which is really important because you'll kill everyone if you're in the group of the fire. And more importantly, when to place your rewind. Because if you place your rewind in the wrong spot, there's no fixing it. Like, it's already done. So if you have a spread and you place your rewind in the middle of the room, when you rewind, you will die. But I will have something to say about that a little bit later. So I'm a medium. I'm going to this blue one. What we did is we had each person effectively go to the stoplight they were claiming. And that was our way of communicating, no, this stoplight is mine. And if you were following your own rules well enough, even if somebody maybe went to the wrong one, as long as they went to the right type of stoplight, there's some time and room to adjust. So there's 5 seconds until the short fire. We've got all of our stoplights claimed. I'm a medium. I go back mid for the first stack. The spreads go off and the stack goes off. That's what that is right there. Now the long fire stoplights are going off, but the first set of rewinds are going off as well. Because I am in the middle of the room, I have the stack marker. That's where we decided to do it. I basically just take a couple of micro steps. See me doing it right here. See these little micro adjustments I'm doing? And I'm going to place my rewind here. The spreads are actually placing them on the inside of the traffic lights. You see this little like double line right here on the arena that kind of circles around. You see where my mouse cursor is? Does it go around the top of the screen and around here? Basically on the inside of their stoplight, right on that line, the spreads are dropping their rewinds there. Meanwhile, the players doing the stoplights need to bait it just along the outside. So you can actually see this middle dot. One of our raid members noticed this. If you just make this middle dot in the little rewind marker over their head disappear, that means that you are safely baiting your stoplight so that it will not hit somebody who is dropping their spread rewind. And with that, they all do the baits. Everybody just slightly goes out a little further. And now those are going to start rotating around. So this is just, so the player that's doing the baits for the stoplights is baiting it in such a way that it never goes through the middle of the room. And that's going to go off for quite some time. Now the medium fires go out and there's also an ice. So the medium fires need to make sure they're a little bit beyond the center of the room, just beyond their stoplight a little bit further. So they just have to go out a little bit extra. Not a big deal. Now, the 3 remaining rewinds, which should all be gaze AoEs, unless it's a DPS, in which case, well, no, yeah, they should all be gaze AoEs. It should be all the ones that have to have the lookaways. These will always be the second rewinds. They're also going to place theirs in the middle of the room, just slightly offset so that they don't hit each other with it. The short fires are going to go do their stoplights, which you can see are rotating, so they need to aim those away while making sure they don't get blasted by the first ones at the same time. Now the long fires are going out, the last stack marker goes out, and then I, as the medium fire, I'm going to go out and do my bait. Now at this point, there's 3 seconds left until the rewind resolves. And as soon as the rewind resolves, the spreads, the gazes, the stack, they're all going to resolve. So because there's gaze AoEs in place, as long as the rewinds are in the right place, that part will resolve correctly. But you need to make sure everybody is basically looking out towards their stoplight right as this wears off. So you see that wears off. Now the direction I'm facing is locked in. It's going to rewind me, and there's nothing I can do about it. If I'm wrong, I'm dead. And if I'm right, I'm good. So you can see right here, if I back up a few frames, we have just enough space here in the middle of the room with the spreads going off to not get killed by those. And then the stack also goes off. That's this water AoE right here, which just barely doesn't reach the spread players. It's basically the size of the boss's hitbox. So this is a very tight strategy. I don't know if it's what people are going to adopt. It does not leave a lot of room for error, but it's also very easy to execute at the same time. So I don't know what people are going to land on, but that was what we decided to do, and that worked out really, really well for us. Then there's a Shell Crusher, which is a split damage AoE. You got to heal, you got to mitt, and everyone needs to stack up in the middle of the room. Bam, we all get hit. And then there's a Shockwave Pulsar, which is just a raid wide. That's immediately followed by a split Tank Buster. You can invuln it, you can cool down, you can kitchen sink cool down it. Whatever you want to do, it's not that big a deal. I think our tanks kitchen sink cool down it, so like they just have a ton of their cooldowns. Yeah, they barely get tickled by that. And then comes, in all honesty, what's probably the harder mechanic, and that's Spell and Waiting Refrain. This entire mechanical dance is nicknamed Hexpocalypse. There's basically going to be 6 of the AoEs around the room, and you're going to have barely any space at all to handle the next several mechanics that come out. So we break into 2 parties of 4. Now, we did this in kind of an interesting way. So instead of doing a group of supports and a group of DPS or 2 light parties, we basically did 3 supports and 1 DPS on one side and 1 support and 3 DPS on the other. We made the healers anchors, meaning they will never swap sides based on the priority system. And then it just went main tank, off tank, DPS, with the DPS having the highest likelihood to have to swap sides. And then D1, 2, and 3, where the Pictomancer will only swap if the Scholar has the same debuff as them. I'll only swap if either the Pictomancer or the Scholar has the same debuff as me. And the melee will swap. And the other DPS will swap if any of the other debuffs match. Now, we actually ended up in a scenario in our clear where there was no swap at all. So my 4th member is not JB here. It's actually IM. It's Whoops. So Whoops has no debuff, no water debuff at all. I have a 28-second debuff. The Pictomancer has a 9-second debuff, and our Scholar has a 37-second debuff. None of those debuffs match, so there's no swap at all. But let's say I had no debuff and IM had no debuff. That would mean he would swap to the other side. But if I had no debuff and the Pictomancer had no debuff or the Scholar had no debuff, then I would swap to the other side. Or if I had 28 seconds and they had 28 seconds, it's basically just a prio system of swapping to the other side. And each side would have that same priority. It's like the other side would then also see, okay, we have 2 matching debuffs too, so I'll send someone to the other side. And then it's just a matter of positioning for the rest of the phase. Once you have all of that lined out, all of these waters are hard body checks. If there's less than 4 people, just like with the previous one during Ultimate Relativity, then you will get Mark of Mortality. So you really don't want this to get screwed up. Actually, hold on. Literally rewind. I forgot to mention something that's actually going to be relevant to this. So earlier I mentioned here that if you place a rewind, that you have no opportunity to fix it. That's not entirely true. What we found out was that if you are a player that is not essential to the 4-player stack itself, in other words, as long as you are not a gaze player, if you place your rewind incorrectly, right before the rewind goes off, die. So like, let's say a spread dropped a rewind in the middle of the room. As soon as they're done with all of their responsibilities, they can just die, because if you're dead, you don't get rewound. So your AoE would drop away from the group. And if you're the spread marker, it's the same deal. Like, let's say the spread marker screwed up and placed it along the outside. They're going to die alone anyway, so it's not that big a deal. But they could also theoretically run into the wall. The only people who can't are the gaze AoEs, because the gaze AoEs need to be a part of that stack or everyone's going to get Mark of Mortality. So they're the only ones who can't realistically fix it. But that is a recovery tool here. If you are a spread and you screw up your rewind, go into the wall once you have no more responsibilities. So, if you have a tower to bait, you can let the tower kill you. Like, you could just take the second blast on the outside of the room. If your last responsibility is putting down your rewind and it's in the wrong spot, then as long as you literally don't have anything else to do, you can just go and die, which sounds really bad, but I mean in game. And that's an important recovery tool, because it's better to have one person die than to either A, kill everyone else, or B, end up with Mark of Mortality. You will always take the death and recover over either of those other results. So that's one really important thing that I wanted to note, because you can technically do the same thing here. The waters can either go into the wall so that they don't hit anybody else and either kill them or give them mark of mortality, or they can just die alone and also not give anyone else mark of mortality. It's better to have a water die if it's like, let's say on this next mechanic, somebody dies. And so you know the next water is going to be a 3-stack. It's way better to just have that water literally just get out and die on their own than for them to stack with 2 other people. All of you live, but all of you are doing 90% less damage. Just simple recovery things like that that only work when you're paying enough attention to make them work. Now, getting the waters is only the start of the mechanic. The Hexpocalypse comes from all of the AoEs that are going to pulse around the room while you resolve all of these water debuffs and the other things the boss is doing at the same time. So right after this first water goes out, there's going to be a Spirit Taker. Spirit Taker is a spread AoE. It'll smack the person it hits for a decent amount of damage, but if it hits anybody else other than the target, it will knock them into the wall and kill them. So right after the first water debuff wears off, as soon as you see the magic vuln appear, you need to start spreading before the Spirit Taker finishes. So you'll see I'm instantly kind of out. It goes, it lands on that person, and we are safe. Now, at the same time, the actual Apocalypse AoEs have started going out. You see them pulsing along the outside. They are going to pulse in like 3 waves. So you can see like it started in the middle, went out. Another one started in the middle, went out. Another one started in the middle and went out. And then those 3 AoEs on each side, 6 in total, are going to pulse around the room. Hence the name Hexpocalypse. But fortunately, it also shows you a very clear kind of safe pattern to do the next thing. Because as soon as they start going out, they start rotating. And you know what we do with every rotating AoE is we go behind it and either wait for it to resolve or follow it. In this case, we're basically waiting for it to resolve. So you can see that it goes out towards 2 and 4 and then starts rotating clockwise. That means right behind 2 and 4, or in this case, A and C, those are both going to start safe, and they're going to stay safe until this first AoE, see that right there, actually rotates over to the markers and makes them unsafe. And that takes 3 whole pulses to do. So we can start there and have a really, really good headway on the rotation while we do this random spread AoE that we have to do. Now, of course, you need to make sure there's enough room to spread, and you need to make sure that you actually avoid the Hexpocalypse as it's heading towards the room. So you don't want to be in the dead center, so you want to be a little bit out, and you want to make sure that you're not in the AoEs as they come. So we spread out, and then as soon as the AoE goes off, we start bolting for the middle. Now, at this point, the next pulse is where I just was. So we actually did a spread that's not as safe. We just let the healers run directly forward. Meanwhile, I have to kind of like loop around. It would be better if I was like here and I moved in and then up, or even better, if we were both like back, see where my mouse cursor is, like down here, back left and back right, like right here and right here. And then we both curved up. So we took the riskier option. And of course, it's when I'm on Bard, not Dancer, when I have En Avant. So not that I think I would be scared to En Avant here potentially, but like it's risky. I always saved sprint for this. This was definitely a sprint mechanic for pretty much everybody. And if I'm even a second late, that was going to slap me. Like that snapshot for us was every time super close. I wouldn't do the type of positioning that we had. I think it was too risky. And I think you're going to see people take a much better option. And there are several much better options than what we did there. Right as this is going off, Darkest Dance is casting. This is a tank buster on the furthest target, followed by a knockback. So we're going to have our second waters resolve right now. And as soon as that resolves, the last Hexpocalypse hits at the same time, which means the tank can get really far away to bait the AoEs from the boss. And they need to bait it all the way towards the wall because we are going to take a big knockback here. Now, the remaining waters need to have those 4-4 splits, so we need to make sure we're in the correct light parties. If we swapped sides at the beginning, it means we're swapping the light party we're in. So light party 1 with the triple support is on the left, and light party 2 with the triple DPS is on the right. And then if you swap sides, it would change, which one you're effectively in. So I didn't swap sides at the beginning. I'm still on that triple DPS side. So I group up with them. We make sure that we're all of us in that last stack. The other side is good. And bam, Again, if something goes wrong here, you can sack that water on their own and resurrect them. There's a good chance, especially if you have a Pictomancer, that that'll still be okay for clearing the phase and getting on to phase 4. Do not give people a mark. Do anything you can to not give people a mark of mortality. I cannot stress that enough. One last raid AoE, and then Memory's End is both raid AoE and an HP check. If Oracle of Darkness is not under 20%, Memory's End will wipe you, very similar to the end of the Usurper of Frost phase. But make sure you also have mitigation because it does hit quite hard. At this point, you are very far into the fight. You are over 10 minutes into the fight once this phase transition actually happens out of the 19 minutes total that you're going to spend here. So now you're going to have to do a dual phase between the Usurper of Frost and Oracle of Darkness. You're going to need to keep their HPs approximately similar, but you're only going to have the Usurper of Frost here at the very beginning. So Usurper of Frost will spawn on either A or C, or at least north or south, whichever is further from where Gaia was defeated in the previous phase of the Oracle of Darkness. We have a tank pick her up and drag her mid, and then the Memory Crystal is going to appear north. The Memory Crystal is the primary mechanic of this entire fight, and it will only appear here if the Dark Crystals in the Ice phase were left alive. So if you killed the Dark Crystals, that Memory Crystal there never appears. You can still do this phase, and you can still go to the end of it and beat the bosses, but you will not get the final phase. Instead, you'll get what is effectively a bad end, and you'll just instantly wipe. Again, very similar to when you killed Thornton before doing double dragons in DSR. So, start of this phase is going to have Usurper of Frost go into the Hraesvelgr mode from the Savage, as you can see right here. And that comes with an Akrai bait, so everyone stacks middle and baits the Akrais and then steps out of it. Now, the bosses here have effectively like no health, but you have to make sure that no mechanic the player has the control of, like the positioning of it, hits the Memory Crystal. All of the raid AoEs, all the unavoidable mechanics that hit it will damage it. And that's okay. It's going to end with very low health at the end of this phase. But if any mechanic aimed at a player, a spread AoE, a Spirit Taker, anything at all hits it, it will die before the end of the phase, and you'll fail. The Memory Crystal will die, and you can't actually win the fight anymore. Ivy just tried to jump on my lap, and I didn't realize I moved my arm and missed. Oh, well, sorry, Ivy. It's not quite your playtime just yet. We got to finish the recording. So, Oracle of Darkness becomes targetable, and you want to keep their health within about 5% of each other, specifically during the Akmorn cast. I'm sorry, Mornafa. Well, Akmorn into Mornafa. It's exactly like DSR, where you needed to keep Nidhogg and Hraesvelgr at a similar HP amount. And if they stray too far from each other, then it becomes a lethal attack. So that's all that is here, just another DSR mechanic showing up again. But it's very, very easy to keep their HPs approximately equalized in this fight. So it really shouldn't be that big of a deal. So then we have Dark Lit Dragon Song. It's going to mark 2 players with a water AoE. Again, it's a 4-player body check. If you don't have 4 players, Mark of Mortality. I'll say that every time. Do not get Mark of Mortality. It's also going to give 4 players the Light Rampant Tether. You just have to make sure that 2 players that aren't tethered directly to each other end up on the north and south side. There's a few really easy ways to solve it. It's actually very similar to the Savage mode version of Light Rampant in Shiva in E8S. If it makes a box shape, we have the DPS swap sides, and then they could just converge on the tower. If it is in this case, if it's a bow tie, we actually just rotate the entire thing clockwise. So these 2 players are not tethered to each other. So they're just both going to rotate clockwise over to C. You could also do counterclockwise. It's completely irrelevant. But the point is that they are safe to be together, and you're going to see them both go together over there and just rotate the entire thing sideways. That is what we opted to do. There is another way to resolve that, but we didn't want to do that. Now, on top of that, you need to make sure there is one of those water stacks on the north side of the room and one of the water stacks on the south side of the room. There's going to be 1 water stack on a Light Rampant player and one water stack on a non-Light Rampant player. The non-Light Rampant players are effectively responsible for making sure that the stack markers end up on the side. So let's say that me and the Pictomancer here both don't have anything. Our job is just to bait an AoE from Shiva and then converge with the stack markers. But let's say that I had the water AoE. I'm on the north side of the room, and I see that one of the light rampant players has a water stack. I would want to swap with the Pictomancer, so that way I end up on the south side of the room, so I can stack with that side of the room, and we can resolve the water stacks adequately. Now, like I said, we are going to be baiting AoEs coming from Usurper of Frost. These are the House of Light. These are the Path of Light. It's basically just baited versions of House of Light. And that's just the chain players need to not be hit by that. So you just bait it out east and west from where Usurper of Frost is. Immediately after that is a Spirit Taker. And again, I cannot stress enough, you need to make sure that the Spirit Taker does not hit the crystal. So because of that, we all shift a little bit south here to make sure that the light rampant tethered players are they're able to basically create a little bit of space between them and the crystal that's literally right behind them. So that's why you see us all kind of moving down a little bit here. And then there's going to be a Hallowed Wings. That's a half room AoE. And you just have to converge with the stacks and the light rampant players on the safe side of the room. And bam, that's all there really is to that. I didn't really mention it earlier, but the light rampant players are in these towers. These just require 2 players each. And it's going to give them a stack of Light Steeped, which is why the Path of Light can't actually hit them. Just want to make sure I'm covering all my bases here. Immediately after the Spirit Taker, Oracle of Darkness is going to do Somber Dance. Somber Dance will attack the player furthest from Gaia, furthest from the Oracle of Darkness, with a Tank Buster. It will then follow up with a hit on the nearest player. Now, in Savage, you actually couldn't make that be the same player. So whoever was furthest would also then subsequently have to not be the nearest player because it couldn't target them. But here, Somber Dance can actually target the same player twice in a row. We didn't do it that way because of a problem with our raid composition. So with Warrior and Paladin, if you are to do an invuln on this Somber Dance, it creates a potential problem going into the next phase with your invuln. So most people who are trying to do this Somber Dance thing are running Warrior and Dark Knight instead of Warrior and Paladin because Hallowed Ground is such a long cooldown. So we just did it normally. We just did, the first one tank goes out with cooldowns, baits the Somber Dance, and then the other tank becomes the closest tank, and they bait the second hit. And that's all there is to it. And that's it. That's the entire thing. That's all you need to do in order to get through that part of the phase. Now, Akmorn is just break up into light parties. It's very important that each tank has aggro on a different boss here. They're going to use these Akmorns on their main aggro target. So if one tank has aggro on both, it's instantly a wipe because it's going to just kill those 4 people and then turn to the other 4 people and kill them instantly too. So very important that your tanks have aggro on each, one of them on each of the targets. So you're going to see we're going to take this repeat damage, which actually hits pretty hard, mind you. This is scarier than the actual Morna Fa. And the Morna Fa is an HP check. If Oracle of Darkness and Usurper of Frost are more than 5% HP apart, then this Morna Fa is lethal. There's nothing you can do about it. You just need to make sure they stay at approximately the same health. That leads into what is arguably, I think inarguably, the toughest mechanic in the entire fight in Crystalline Time. Crystalline Time is like Ultimate Relativity cranked up to an 11. It's going to give you a ton of debuffs. As you can see, like I have ice and this red debuff. I've got a 32-second rewind. There's a blue debuff. There's water. There's a stack marker. There's arrows. And on top of that, there's going to be stoplights that are doing huge explosions that are going to really restrict the space that you can do in the room. It's basically a harder version. It's basically a combined version of Advanced Relativity from E12S as well as Worm's Lament from E8S. There's going to be dragon heads floating around the room that need to be killed by basically being run into until that they disappear by players with red debuffs. They drop puddles that the blue debuff players need to step in order to cleanse. You need to coordinate, how you're going to break the heads without the explosion killing other people because it's a massive explosion. It has to be the red players doing it. How are you going to space out the ices? How are you going to space out the arrows? Where is the stack marker going to go? There's a whole lot that goes into this phase that's really hard to show you from a single perspective. But I'll break it down as simply as I can. The players with the red debuffs will always be 2 ice debuffs and 2 arrow debuffs. The ice debuffs are the donut AoEs from earlier. You saw those during Ultimate Relativity. And the arrow debuff, if you did E12S, is the same. It's a giant AoE that knocks players away, and they're going to be the ones responsible for the heads every time. The other players are the blue debuff players, and they are always going to consist of 1 ice debuff, 1 water debuff, which is the 4-player stack, which does have the body check, a stack marker, which does also have a body check of a minimum of 5 players, and a spread marker, who is just needs to be away. So the arrows, the ice, the water, and the stack are all going to resolve first, as well as 2 of the red debuffs. So because both of the heads actually start north and then rotate clockwise and counterclockwise away from each other south, the ice players with the short debuffs have to get them first. So all we do is we send them directly east and west and stand on this like double line. There's a lot of very particular spacing that you kind of have to do in this fight for a number of reasons. One, the amount of space that other players have when you're resolving your mechanic is very limited, so you have to make sure you don't kill them. More importantly, you cannot hit the memory crystal. You cannot drop the spread on the memory crystal. You cannot drop the stack on the memory crystal. You cannot drop the water on the memory crystal. You can't clip the memory crystal with the ice. You can't clip it with the wind. So everything has to happen away from the memory crystal, which limits your space considerably because a lot of these AoEs are absolutely massive. So ice AoEs go to east and west is what we did, and the arrow AoEs will go south. There's a lot of using these lines here to determine where the safe spots are. And you can already see off to the side here, there's an arrow debuff who's kind of sitting in what we like to call a cubby. It's basically this same space where my mouse cursor is, but closer to this side of the room. And the reason why those are so important is because those are the maximum ranges of the stoplight AoEs. There's going to be 2 stoplights that go off basically immediately, 2 stoplights with a small delay, the ones that aren't tethered, and 2 stoplights that have the blue/purple tether, which will go off way later. So we need to make sure that we're safe from all of that, and it's just a lot to deal with. So immediately upon the stoplights getting their tethers, the north and south stoplight will explode. So you have to use these giant open spaces on the east and the west, which kind of helps resolve the fact that the ices have to be there. So I'm just sitting east or west, waiting for the dragon head to walk into me. The water debuff just went off with the rest of the party right here. So the water debuff, what is it? It's like the water debuff, the ice player with the blue debuff instead of the red debuff, the stack marker, this one right here on JS, so the water is standing with the other type of stack marker, as well as one of the arrows is all stacked together, and that's on the side of the room with a purple stoplight. So like the stoplights that are going to take the longest time to explode. They all have to be together. You have no option in the matter. Then the remaining ices are spread east and west. The other arrow is on the other safe south side. So in this case, we're on the east side of the room. The other arrow, you can actually use my mini map right here. My mini map is great for this. You can see the spread is northwest. There's an arrow southwest. The party for the water stack is here. And then you can see on D and B, there's a blue dot for each of the ice players. The dragon head hitting me and the ice and arrow debuffs resolving basically all happen at exactly the same time. So what's going to happen here, the ice players are just trying to kill nobody else. The spread is away from everyone else, but not close to the memory crystal. And the party, the 3 players that were stacked with the arrow for the water AoE, they need to get knocked to the other side of the room. When they're on the other side of the room, it'll be the yellow stack marker player, the blue ice, the water player, the spread, and whichever ice is close, whichever red ice player is closest to that side of the room will rotate up, and that gives you 5 players to prevent Mark of Mortality from this stack marker that's on JS. Meanwhile, the red arrows now have to worry about their dragon heads. They have a ton of time to pop it, but you can either go with the slow strat or the fast strat. We went with the fast strat, and retrospectively, I think we should have gone with the slow strat, but it's irrelevant because it's just a matter of how confident you are in your ice spacing. And we set it up in such a way that I, as an ice player who needs to dodge a stoplight, am basically in no danger. Like we had it set up correctly so that wasn't a concern. So I need to now dodge a stoplight, and then I need to go join the rest of the party north. And you can see the dragon heads just got popped. So now all the red debuffs are done. And all of the players with red debuffs, they're literally done with everything except dodging AoEs and placing their rewinds. The second half is the tougher part. There's now 4 blue debuffs that need to go collect cleanses off the ground while dodging everything else. So there's now going to be exo-waves coming from first either the east or west side of the room, and then afterwards another set coming from the north or south. And you have to remember where those are because there's going to be another AoE that gets placed there later. Because while those are going out, the Usurper of Frost is actually placing rewind locations for a mechanic that she's going to do later. So everyone except for the red arrows joins up north, and we just dodge AoEs. At this point, it's just about not getting hit by AoEs. And it's not that hard to do, but there's also a lot happening around you, and you don't have a lot of time because the rewinds are being placed in about 10 seconds. Right here is one of the premier spots that you would want to sprint, probably a second before. We just assigned a cleanse location for each of the debuffs. So if we go back to the start of the mechanic, I can explain it more easily. There's always going to be an ice player with a blue debuff. That player we assign to 4, for example. There's always going to be a water player with a blue debuff. That person always gets the cleanse that's going to be at 3 because that's where we've decided to place it. There's going to be a spread marker player with a blue. They're going to go to D. And there's going to be a stack marker. This particular stack marker with a blue, they're going to go to B. It's mostly color-coded. The ice is the only one that's not color-coded, which in a way makes it color-coded because you're the only one that isn't, if that makes sense. They need to sprint, grab it, and then get to a very specific spot on the arena for the follow-up. So the first wave came from the D side, from the west side of the room, and the second wave came from the south side. Because the boss is placing rewinds in those locations, she's actually going to do a Hallowed Wings knockback from that spot. It's kind of a wild charge. Here it doesn't hit as hard as it did in E8S, but it'll heavily damage the first and 5th player on the list and only moderately damage the other 6 players. The first 3 non-tanks, so the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th player hit, will get magic vulns. And then because it does it twice in a row, when the second one goes off, then the other set of 3 players would also do that. So the tanks are meant to take a pretty considerable amount of damage from this. It's not, again, it doesn't hit nearly as hard as E8S does, but it's very good. In fact, if you actually have, I think it's like 30 or 40% mitigation and shields, anyone can survive, regardless of the order. So if you really want to over-prepare for this and mitigate all disaster, throw a ton of MIT at this next bit, and even if someone's in the wrong spot, as long as they don't go into the wall from the knockback, there's a good chance they're going to survive, and then you can just finish the phase. All that matters, again, do not hit the memory crystal with anything here. If you had the spread, make sure the spread wasn't on it. If you had the stack, make sure the stack wasn't taken too close to the memory crystal. It is very easy to accidentally kill the memory crystal. And there's still one more mechanic that can actually kill it here. So, because west and south are where the 2 waves came from, that means the Hallowed Wings are going to come first from west and then from south. So we need to set up in such a way that resolves all of that. Now, unfortunately, one of our tanks is a little late here. You can see this specific one is placed wrong. So we do lose a player because of that. And that doesn't end up mattering. We still end up clearing, so that's all that matters. But as soon as these rewinds are placed, Oracle of Darkness is casting Spirit Taker. That is the spread AoE, so everybody needs to spread. Do not spread near the memory crystal. If you are on the north side of the map doing these placements, because it just happened to come from the north side, everybody needs to cheat away from the memory crystal. So you kind of do like a curve along the wall instead of going anywhere near the north side of the room. We are lucky on this one. This is a south side room, but listen, I've seen people panic spread and run all the way north and then get Spirit Taker. I swear this Spirit Taker knows if you're standing next to the memory crystal. Almost every time somebody was standing next to a memory crystal, the Spirit Taker chose that person. So I feel like just don't take the chance. Just don't go anywhere near it. Just spread as far away as possible. Now, one thing I will say, we had people collect their cleanses before doing these rewinds. You actually have 6 seconds here to, you actually have like 6 or 7 seconds here to actually do your cleanses after you place your rewind. Now, of course, that means those 2 players become another place where players need to, like, you have no choice but to spread away from those locations. So in my opinion, there is enough time to do it before then. So you should, because it eliminates having 3 places on the arena that are effectively no-go zones or have to be assigned to specific players for spread. So it creates another variable that I don't want for the spread for the Spirit Taker, but it is an option, and I think it may be an option that people go towards in the future because it makes the timing of your rewind way less strict. So that's definitely a major, major factor that plays into this entire thing. Once the Spirit Taker goes out, everyone will be rewound, and there will be 2 Hallowed Wings. You can see that our Dragoon survives the first hit. Again, if we had 30, we basically have no mitt here. What buff is this? Is this Horoscope? Oh, it's Helios Conjunction. Okay. Basically, if we had enough mitt, he would have lived. Like, he actually only barely died because he took the Tank Buster damage from the first hit. But the second hit only does, how much does it do to me? The second hit does about 60,000. So if he had mitt, he probably would have had 70,000 health left and then took the second hit and had about 15,000 health left. So yeah, if you bring enough mitt, it can actually become irrelevant, the order here. But it's a lot of mitt to commit specifically to this when, you know, you do have other things that you can be placing that mitt on. But it's worth a consideration. And if your group can manage it, it will save you a ton of headaches on this particular mechanic, especially the headache he gets here. Because right after that, there's an Akmorn. Again, they need to be within 5% HP of each other. And this is 2 4-player stacks. Now, fortunately, there's no Mark of Mortality punishment here. But being in a 3-player stack for this sucks. It does a ton of damage. And so much so that when he gets up, he actually takes a hit just to make sure that they can survive. He actually would have lived if he stayed out. And I think our entire party would have lived. But, I mean, he said it in his own words. If he can do something that helps the other 3 people in his stack survive, he will. And he actually had invuln. Akmorn goes through the res invuln. So you cannot res invuln cheese this either. If you walk into it, you will take the damage. You will take the hit. So be very careful. But if you can save the lives of everyone else, it very well may be worth it. It does mean he goes into the final phase with about 20 seconds of Brink left. But we lived and we got the clear. So again, does it matter? No. This Mornifah, of course, will also hurt because it only has 7 people and it is split damage. And again, they need to be within 5% HP of each other. If you can draw out this last bit as long as possible, if you have a death, because there's about to be a 75-second downtime. Like we could only have drawn that out like slightly longer, but there's about to be 75 seconds of downtime. So a lot of that Brink is actually going to go away. And a lot of your weakness would go away too. If you rezzed and survived, your weakness is almost entirely gone by the time you get here. So making sure everyone's alive before the cutscene plays is very important. You can see the crystal survived as well. If that crystal doesn't survive, I'll actually jump ahead and show you. This is where you would get a bad ending. This is like if you kill them and there's no memory crystal, this is what would happen instead. You would be taken to the Eden's Promise Arena, and the Guardian of Eden would show up and one-shot you, and no, you cannot tank LB it. You will die. You will need a tank LB, but it would not save you in this particular case. That is going to instantly KO you with Paradise Lost. Now, going back, if you do it correctly, you get a 75-second long cutscene that introduces Pandora, which is the final boss of the raid. And this phase is very simple. Most ultimate final phases are very, very easy mechanics. They're essentially choke checks where players are like nervous, their hearts are racing, and they're like, okay, we could win. This is like this is a 19-minute fight. You don't want to fail here because then a third of an hour is gone. Like every pull you get to the very end is a significant portion of your day gone. So you really don't want to screw this up, but those nerves really get to you. So that's why it's called a choke check. And this one's no different. It's basically usually one Exa style mechanic, like a moving AoE, one very specific positioning check where usually I have to step into something, and one big mitt/positioning check. It's a lot of just making sure you have the right mitigation and the right positioning to survive, as opposed to like juggling debuffs or anything like that. So, Fulgent Blade, I believe is what this is called. This summons a bunch of lines that will splash outward. They'll either go clockwise or counterclockwise, but the idea is to just avoid them as they splash, or in this case, as they slash, and step into the safe spots after they pass. So you just step into the first one, step away from the second one, step into the second one, step away from the third one, step into the third one, wait, and then there's an Morn here, so you need to get into light parties, 4 on each side, bam. Now, if you got hit by any of those Exa lines, 2 things happen. 1, you get a 90% damage down, which you really don't want at this point. And B, you actually get either dark or light vulnerability, depending on which of the 2 you were hit by, if you didn't die outright. And if you have dark vulnerability and you're on the dark side of Pandora, her dark wing, you will die. See, this AoE is dark and the other one is light. If you have the corresponding debuff, you will die. You can technically save it by swapping sides, but you have a 90% damage down. It's actually better if you just die on the side you're supposed to than it is for you to survive. One might argue that a healer might want to prefer surviving over dying, especially because their mana pool is going to be very important for the next mechanic. But arguably, it's better to just die and just to eat it and not to try to save it. If anything, it's a bad result if you somehow manage to accidentally save it. Both of your tanks need to have aggro here, by the way. Every auto attack hits both of the tanks, and you really don't want that to hit your DPS. So then Paradise Regained is the second mechanic. This is probably the most complicated mechanic in the entire fight. Not in the entire fight, sorry, in the entire phase. So there's going to be 2 back-to-back tank busters that need to be resolved. 2 back-to-back dual tank busters to boot. So each tank is going to take 2 busters. And then 3 towers that each require at least 2 players in, well, each of them. So you need like both the healers in one, both the melee in one, both the ranged in one. Or, just 2 DPS, 2 DPS, 2 healers. The tanks can technically participate if they set it up properly, but you really don't want to rely on them because they're doing the buster. So after the towers start going down, the boss is going to do Wings of Dark and Light. So either the light wing is going to glow or the dark wing is going to glow. The light wing glowing first means that there's going to be a tank buster on the furthest player first and a tank buster on the nearest player second. Also, it means that there is a tank buster going out on the current main target that needs to be aimed away from where the group is. So the main tank faces the boss AoE towards a specific side of the room, and the other tank goes really close or really far, depending on which tether is first. However, when the second time this happens again, like right afterwards, the same attack cannot target the same player a second time. So the wing cannot be done by the same player twice. So like your warrior can't home gang, do the light tether, and then do the dark tether. They need to do the light tether, then make sure they're the main target, they're the main aggro target, and then the other tank has to do the dark tether. So that means there's a lot of like direction shenanigans, making sure the towers are safe, making sure the tanks get into position correctly, making sure they both live. And it's a lot of stress on specifically the tanks here. I don't know how to better describe it other than to aim the AoE away from the towers and then step into the towers. Like the towers are really fast. Like we did healers, then ranged, then melee. All the players that aren't dealing with the tank mechanic just need to go from tower to tower and make sure they're safe. In fact, realistically, you only need to go to the second tower and the melees just need to go to the third one. We also opted to loop around the boss. If you're very careful, you can actually run directly through the boss hitbox. It does technically run the risk of the dark tether snapping to somebody who's running directly through, but that only happens if a player is really, really slow and generally shouldn't happen. So for tanks out there, the positioning is pretty simple. You'll see a diagram. It'll make a lot of sense. Provoke during the Wings, Dark, and Light cast. Do not try to provoke later. Do not forget provoke. One tank will invuln and the other tank will kitchen sink. You don't have to invuln, but it just makes your life easier to have one tank who literally can't die. So that's what most groups are doing. They're doing one tank will invuln, one tank will kitchen sink, and then the tank, we did it. The tank that's invulning is the tank that is doing the provoke. So they're the off tank, basically. The off tank is provoking. Because, I mean, it just makes sense. Like, you press one button and you'll survive the whole mechanic. And then you provoke. The other tank literally has to weave all of their other mitt and then also provoke. That wouldn't be good. That wouldn't make sense. So that's what we did. We made sure that the off tank is the one invulning and also dealing with that. So it's wings of dark and light. It's light first because the light wing is that's what the tether is. I step into the second tower. There's the dark tether under the boss. That's also a tank buster. You can see it just barely doesn't clip past the hitbox here. And then the melees go and grab that third tower. And nice and easy. So then we go to the third mechanic. This is just 4 back-to-back split damage line AoEs that give the person in front a vulnerability depending on which side of the boss you're on. So like we're on the light side of the boss. This is the light wing. The other party's on the dark side. And the wings will only target players on that side of the boss. So, you know, if you're on the west side of the boss, you're eligible and you're the closest player, you'll be targeted by the light wing. You can do some weird snapshot shenanigans where the dark wing technically gets baited on the left side because a player baited it and then like dashed over to the left. It's not built that way unless there's 0 players on one side of the boss. That won't happen most of the time, but like just be careful. So we have 1 light party back left of the boss, 1 light party back right. And we do TMRH. That's what we did. You don't have to do that order. That's what we did. The tanks will be the first in line, the first hit. Now, once you get a vulnerability, you cannot take the same wing again. So you have to go to the other side. So my call here was like tank, dodge and swap. M, dodge and swap. R, dodge and swap. H, dodge final hit. So you can see HH is our tank. When this goes out, he gets a light vulnerability debuff, and the other tank gets a dark vulnerability. That means they need to switch the sides that they're in. So you step out of that AoE, and now the melees step in front, and they'll get it. So now you can see JB has a light, and IM has a dark. Now the ranged will step in front. I'm going to get a light, and the Picto is going to get a dark. We swap sides. You see me do the movement, and then the healers step in front. They get it, and then you just step out of the last AoE. At that point, you've done the entire fight, and you just need to do it on repeat. There is only one major thing you still need to do. Pandora's Box. This is simply a tank LB3 check. If you do not have tank LB3, you die. Now, funnily enough, if you resurrect as Pandora's Box, finishes casting, the fight will continue. You could technically res a healer and healer LB, but that would be stupid. So don't do that. Like, the only reason you would have to do that, one good reason, if you lost like 5 or 6 people on polarizing strikes for some reason, and you can get a res on a healer, and right as Pandora's Box is about to finish casting, they take their res and get up, in theory, they might be able to save it. The problem with that, of course, becomes whether or not they just get autoed to death before they actually pull it off. Because one auto attack will end their lives. And honestly, even if you do survive, they're probably going to die because the tanks need a second to provoke. So you're almost pretty much guaranteeing that that player is then going to die. It's nice for practice. And in theory, when we have enough gear, like years down the line, like when we get to 7.3 and we get the extra 5 item levels, or years down the line, if they job changes, just make this DPS check super easy, then that might be a viable way to save it if the mechanic is screwed up. But for now, it would just mean more practice. Like, odds are you are not going to make the check if that's something like, because then you're going to be down DPS for the entire Pandora's Box cast, and then you're going to lose the healer, and they're not going to have any MP. It's going to be a disaster. But hey, it's an option. Who knows? Maybe what you do is if there's a ton of people dead, but you can get reses out, maybe you get reses on both the tanks and the healer, then both the tanks can get up and do their provokes at the same time the healer gets up, and then they'll get to do the healer LB. Like, yeah, I'm throwing hypotheticals just because it's fun, but you can do it. We have had runs where like a tank got rezzed and then just soloed, the next mechanic until they got autoed to death, like this right here. And then it's on repeat. It's literally the exact same mechanics over and over again until you get to the Enrage cast, which is right here at Paradise Lost. So by the time you get to Paradise Lost, because you had to tank LB3 earlier, there's a good chance you only have, you know, like what we have, like a little bit more than a bar and a half of limit break, or a little bit under 2 bars. Right when Reen says you can weather this, I know it, you'll hear a limit break sound right there, and the LB3 will charge. You have to send that immediately as whatever you're LBing as, like a melee, presumably, but you know, you never know. Because otherwise it will not land before the boss dies. And that's it. You just have to beat the DPS check from that point on, and you are good to go. When the boss gets under 3% HP, the game generally accepts you probably are about to win. And you get Rena and Gaia yelling, yeah, right as the LB3 lands. Meant to be really cinematic, like they're doing the whole anime ending, like everyone's charging up to finish the big bad. And yeah, that's the end of the fight. There you go. And now you've won. And that's the entirety of the fight. You do get a very, very special arena here. Very Final Fantasy VIII inspired arena, as you can see. It was something special to look at, let me tell you. When you get to this screen right here, and it's emotional. Trust me, it's a beautiful, beautiful scene. That you know, I wonder if they did the graphics update to all the foliage, and they just really wanted to show it off. Because oh boy, did they achieve that here. There is also the actual enrage itself. If you fail to kill the boss, it just like the screen goes to black, and basically it's assumed that like all life has been obliterated. And you just have Pandora saying our promised fates. You can actually spin the camera here, and Pandora's weapon actually has the glow, the like blue glow that the ultimate weapons have from this fight. But that's it. That's Futures Rewritten Ultimate. So much fun. Really, really fun fight. I think it's going to encourage a lot of people to get into Ultimates. And honestly, I'm actually really glad to see that, because after DSR on top, a lot of more players were discouraged from doing Ultimates. And as much as stuff like Sauce's Ultimate Project and stuff really did everything they could to introduce more players to it and get them clears and everything, it's still like a really, really tough spot to be in as a community, when it's hard to get people into a piece of content that is really exhilarating and fun, and they might be interested in it, but they've just heard so many horror stories about what's happened. There will be no horror stories for this fight, or if they are, they will be very isolated, because quite frankly, there's nothing horror story worthy that is happening in this fight that isn't very anecdotal and is a result of the fight or its design itself. I do think that Pictomancer is genuinely a problem and is way too strong for this fight, and is going to be basically locked in permanently for most groups, especially in Party Finder, until something changes. And I'm going to have a separate video about that as a whole. But quite frankly, that is the biggest problem, is that Pictomancer obliterates this fight to the capacity that it does. It's not an actual problem with the fight. It's a problem with Pictomancer. Yes, there were some annoyances in the ice phase. And yes, it absolutely could have been harder. There are things they didn't do that they could have done, and that happens with every ultimate, but it's very, very noticeable here. And in some cases, some people say they could have done another phase. Not really. They could have enhanced the phase that was there, or shortened the phase, or made the transition not 75 seconds long and instead had more gameplay during that section. But what they did here was pure cinema. The voice acting is pristine. The attention to detail is stellar. The pacing of the mechanics is exhilarating. I have nothing but high praise for this. The only potential complaint is that it is too easy. And again, I don't even see that as a problem. I think Final Fantasy XIV needed a palette cleanse from DSR and top. Now, if they do another DSR or top level difficulty, that's just like so insanely, like just absolutely crazy, insanely insane, one might say. It will not feel like we're being beat into a bloody pulp. And quite frankly, I don't know that you can make another DSR or top in this game with the way that it's built. Those fights are really kind of the pinnacle. DSR is the pinnacle of difficulty balanced with fun, like pushing the difficulty as high as you can while still being kind of fun. And top is literally the other way, where it's as high as you can push the difficulty while not having fun. I feel still like they're both pretty close, but they're just so different in their design. One with a lot of pure randomness, and one with a lot of like executional demand and punishment if you're unable to do so, that I just don't see where you go from there. You either make something equal to them, or you make something easier. And there's not a problem with something being easier than either of those encounters, as long as it's fun to watch, as long as it's fun to play, and as long as it actually gets people doing the content in the first place. I'm okay with that. That's kind of been Dawn Trail's thing, where it seems like they're not aiming to like be a hyper punishing expansion. And maybe that's just because we're still early in it, but they are really focusing on the production value and how fun things are. As easy as the Tier of Arcadian was, I still had a ton of fun doing it, and I never hated doing my re-clears for it. And that is, for me, that's unheard of. I sometimes just despise re-clears and despise going back into tiers, and there's always like 2 or 3 fights that I'm just like, why am I even here right now? Yes, I'm looking at you, Abyssos, for absolute certainty. But this, I'm looking forward to doing this every week. I'm looking forward to collecting the weapons. I think most of the weapons look really good, which is a surprise. I most of the time don't feel that way. And I'm just impressed across the board. I could levy some other minor complaints against it if I want. I think there's too many downtime phases, for example, and not enough pure uptime phases like there is in phase 3 and phase 5. And that's kind of like, maybe they could have made the Dark Crystal phase harder in some capacity, or made the interaction between the crystals more interesting. But at that point, I'm just kind of nitpicking for the sake of not wanting to be overwhelmingly positive, as much as I had a great time doing this fight. If you have never done an ultimate before, this could very well be your first one. I didn't think, like, Uwu's easy, and like Uwu's still likely the best option because it's like the most approachable one. But like, if you were looking for something that reflects the game's modern design elements, has your full kit available at the moment at level 100, and wanted a really good challenge, this is like one of the perfect entry level ultimates that we have. And then going to DSR on top doesn't feel like as monumental of something that you need to do. So I don't know. I think they did a great job. I can levy another complaint. There's a lot of stuff from Eden that's not here. All of Eden's Promise isn't here. None of the primal junctioning is here. Titan's not here. You know, like, there's a lot of that stuff. This isn't really Eden Ultimate. It's Rena and Gaia Ultimate, and then Dad is there as Thancred. Like, that's like the only other complaints I can realistically levy, and I don't even care. I had a great time. It was a lot of fun. I encourage people who are looking to get into Ultimate to consider getting into this one, because it just is a really, really good time. Was there anything else I wanted to say? I don't know. I've been talking for so long, I don't really remember. I don't know. I think I just wrap it up there and say, yeah, good time. Had a great time with my crew. Looking forward to streaming it every week and getting through it. And I hope everyone else who's out there working on it is having a good time as well. So thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, take care.